was not a believer in the Cardinals at the start of the year, and I'm certainly not a believer now. Hey now, baseball fans, you don't need FanGraphs, StatCast, or fake formulas for real news and stories from the NL Central. It's time to open the files at Central Intelligence and OK Baseball podcast, presented by Slasher Sports. New episode lineups drop every Thursday mornings on the OK Baseball podcast feed at Spotify and on our YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe so you never whiff on new content. I'm Special Agent for National League Central Affairs and your host, Steve Feck. Each week we do background checks on the week that was for the 5 NL Central teams. Then we open up investigations into the facts and figures that make the NL Central the most interesting division in Major League Baseball. And I honestly believe that. It's not hype for the podcast. I think the NL Central has always been a fascinating division. And I think here in 2023, of all of divisions there, I think the NL Central is the one that's the most fun to talk about. We're going to talk about a lot of different things today. We're going to talk about Andrew McCutchen and his milestone 2000, maybe discuss is he a Hall of Fame candidate or not. But I really want it to be more of a personal thing when we get to Kutch later in the episode. I want to kick off with a couple of news and notes that I think will be of interest to you and I think are important to keep in the back of your mind here. And they're not necessarily at the forefront right now, but they're just kind of interesting things in the back. Joey Votto completed his maximum 20-game stint and rehab assignment for the Reds. That came on Saturday. There's still no decision as to what to do with Votto. As of right now, Votto is in Cincinnati, getting more attention and still working to try to build back his shoulder from the rotator cuff surgery. I hate to think that Votto will not play ever again for the Reds. It's just something. Again, I'm not a Reds fan per se. I'm not a Joey Votto fan even necessarily, but I mean, I think Joey Votto's good for baseball, and to have his career suddenly come to an end, I think that would be a shame. With the year the Reds are having and the opportunities the Reds have to contend throughout the rest of the 2023 season in the Central, not have Votto part of that at all, even if just a bench player or as a pinch hitter. I think that would be a shame. So it'll be interesting to follow that, keep an eye on what's happening with Joey Votto and the Reds. I mean, quite honestly, he doesn't have a spot in the lineup right now. I mean, they brought up all the kids. They've got Ellie De La Cruz and they have Spears. They've got all of these young, talented players that need to play every day. Nick Senzel's going to come off the IL pretty soon. And quite honestly, he needs to play on a regular basis more than, let's say, Joey Votto would be. And who knows where Nick Senzel is going to do when he comes up. Is he going to be in the outfield rotation? Is he going to spell people at third base? It's hard to tell. So let alone not being able to figure out what to do with Nick Senzel. Now you got the Joey Votto situation, but apparently it has not gone as well as Votto and the team had hoped. When you have rotator cuff issues and rotator cuff surgery, it's hit or miss. It's why it's unlike the Tommy John shoulder surgery, shoulder issues. One procedure could work for someone terrifically. Another procedure could be career ending. So it'll be interesting to see what's up with Joey Votto. And then I want to talk about the court decision that's forcing Diamond Sports, which runs all of the Bally Sports regional sports networks, to pay the full amount to all of the teams that they're still trying to figure out, are we going to keep the rights or not? How it pertains to the NL Central is that the Reds have an equity stake in Bally Sports Ohio, which also airs Cleveland Guardian games. The Guardians are due their payment on the 1st of July, as are, I believe, let me see if I can find this here. The Twins and the Diamondbacks are all coming due on the 1st of July. Coming up tomorrow, they have to pay the Texas Rangers. Diamond Sports does for their rights. So it'll be interesting how the Reds situation will be affected, because technically, even though 75% of the rights fees have been paid, the judge threw out a request to have that be all that's being paid to the teams. So now suddenly, if the Guardians' rights are now reverting back to MLB, how does that affect revenues for the Reds, since they have that controlling stake interest in Bally Sports Ohio? So just something, again, is it really important? Is it something you want to rush and see news on or video on? Not necessarily, but these are two sort of stories, both involving the Reds, that I think will be interesting to kind of keep an eye on. I mean, the Reds aren't due their final 25% until July 15th, I believe. And now, does that mean now that the Reds could, if they default on paying the Guardians on July 1st, would the Reds then now take responsibility as the rights holder for Guardians games? That's very, very tricky. I mean, you remember with Masson, with the Orioles and Nationals. I mean, that's been an issue, I think, for both franchises. But I mean, but it's specifically for the Orioles. I think the Orioles are more upset about the situation than the Nationals are. But just something that kind of keep in mind as the 2023 season unfolds and as we get closer to drop dead deadlines as far as rights fees are going. Let's take a look back at the week that was. We're going to start from the bottom of the standings, work our way on up, which means we're going to start with the Cardinals. The fork is out. Watching the Cardinals cough up that lead against the Giants. They were swept by the Giants as we record this. They were up by 2 runs. Mike Yastrzemski hit a 2-run homer in the top of the 9th. They surrendered 3 runs with Steven Matz coming in to pitch the 10th. The Cardinals are facing some really serious issues. Like, they had a winning May, so everybody was saying, "Well, see, the Cardinals are okay." I have said throughout the Central Intelligence podcast process that I was not a believer in the Cardinals at the start of the year, and I'm certainly not a believer now. They are now 2-8 in June. You can't go into a rebuild if you're the Cardinals, and the reason for that, I mean, it's twofold. One, the Cardinals draw. I mean, they're expected to draw 3 million fans again. I mean, it's one of the most loyal, terrific fan bases in all of baseball there in St. Louis. Certainly among the most knowledgeable, having sat in the stands. I mean, Cardinal fans, they not only know their team, they know the opposition as well, what's going on. So you really can't punt the year completely, and you can't trade off your big stars in Goldschmidt and Arenado, because the Cardinals do a great job of selling their star players. They make that a big part of the baseball experience there in St. Louis. So the Cardinals are going to have to step back, though. I think this series loss to the Giants, followed up. They lost 2 or 3 to the Reds. The Pirates have had their number. I think it's time to just kind of step back, move pieces, and move them quickly before they devalue. I mean, the bullpen has been a disaster, but there are a lot of arms in there that people would look at and say, well, maybe with the right tinkering, they can revive their career. I mean, you look at Jordan Hicks or Genesis Cabrera. I mean, those are arms. Even Chris Stratton. Chris Stratton's probably the best reliever on that staff right now. He's not necessarily getting a lot of save opportunities, but the Cardinals aren't presenting a lot of save opportunities. Gallegos, his hard hit percentage is over 48%. He coughed up the homer to Yastrzemski. He's not a closer. He's a good bullpen piece. So maybe you move these guys so you can set yourself up for 2024. Sometimes, see, where it's hard, I think, for the Cardinals front office is that on paper, on reports, on projections, the Cardinals are better than they've shown. Their Pythagorean record is better than the 27-42 that they sit on as we record this. But ultimately, you have to look in the mirror after every game and say, you know what, this just isn't working. This is just one of those years. This team, this combination of players and coaching staff is just not working. And if the Cardinals want to maximize their deals with Arenado, again, Arenado could have opted out, and he loves it in St. Louis, and he thinks that organization is poised for good things, especially in a relatively competitive division where there's not really a super team or a great team, at least not at this particular point. So it'll be really interesting to see what the Cardinals end up doing. They've got some people hurt. So really, would it really kill them to just, again, not tank, not give away players, not totally tear everything down to build it back up, but maybe sacrifice some wins this year to put yourself in a better position next year? And I really wonder if Oli Marmol is the manager when the Cardinals leave for London to take on the Cubs in that London series next weekend. If they lose another series, I would imagine that discussion has to be had by the front office to say, okay, look, we need to bring something in. Bet the Cardinals wish Skip Schumacher would have stayed in the organization with the job he's done with the Marlins. The Cubs, they were swept by the Angels. They did take 2 or 3 from the Giants. So again, that's another measuring stick for the Cardinals. Well, gee, the Cubs, even with something, I mean, even they have Justin Steele who has missed 2 weeks now. He was one of their more effective pitchers. Drew Smiley's been getting smacked around, but the Cubs still found a way to take 2 or 3 from the Giants, while the Cardinals got swept by the Giants in the series following that. So you have to wonder how the Cubs and other people in the division are faring. Is that playing into the decision as well for the Cardinals? But the Cubs are, if they're going to stay in it, they're going to have to do a better job on the road. They do okay at Wrigley. They're right around 500. In fact, I think when they beat the Pirates the other night, I want to say that put them one game above 500 at home. But, they're significantly under 500 on the road. They're playing to projections in a lot of ways, at least offensively. I mean, they do have a really solid lineup. It's a lineup capable of putting up runs in bunches. I don't know that they have the pitching staff that can supplement and take the pressure off of that lineup as the season wears on. I mean, Drew Smiley's been getting smacked around. Before I came on to record this, I was watching a Pirates-Cubs game, and Drew Smiley was giving up homers right and left. I mean, he did not look like he looked early in the season. Kyle Hendricks is back, so that's a nice little touch. But I mean, I don't know that the Cubs are really in a position to contend. Their bullpen only has 9 saves all year. You have to get a more consistent, better effort from your bullpen if you're going to be serious about contending in the NL Central. I think the Cubs, who are coming out of a rebuild, as the Pirates and Reds are, I think the Cubs are not that far off. I'm sure that Matt Mervis' struggles have to make them a little bit nervous. He was hitting 189 the last time that I checked what his batting average was. He's not really driving in runs. He's hitting some tough luck at times, but really, the Cubs, this is just another stepping stone to being a competitive team in 2024. And it's like kind of ironic that both the Cardinals, who we talked about, and now the Cubs, both have higher probabilities to make the postseason than the Pirates do or the Reds do. And the Pirates and Reds are playing, much, much better baseball. They've got 6 games against the Bucks over the next 2 weeks. They have to take care of things at home. They have to try to win 2 or 3 from the Pirates, in Pittsburgh. They have to play the Phillies also coming up here after they come back from St. Louis. I don't know what to say about the Cubs, because you look at them and sometimes they look so good, and that offense really is dangerous. I mean, any opposing manager is going to be nervous going up against the Cubs, but they're just not putting it together. And I think their pitching, Jameson Taillon certainly has not pitched well. Their bullpen has been hit or miss. I mean, when Brad Boxberger, of course, he's on the IL now, is one of your more effective relievers, that's not a good sign. I witnessed Julian Merriweather try to make it with the Blue Jays, given multiple options. He doesn't stay healthy, and when he is healthy, he's wildly inconsistent, though his strikeout numbers have been better. He still has been giving up a lot of hard hit balls. So the Cubs, this is the time. They can take advantage of the fact that the Cardinals are sliding back some, that the Reds and Pirates are still unproven. They're a young team that's unproven, and the Brewers have had their issues. So if the Cubs can somehow find a way to hang in it, perhaps they can ride their lineup, to an NL Central division. I don't think anyone believes that this is a more than one playoff spot division. I think whoever wins the NL Central is the only team from the division that's going to make the playoffs. That's not a knock on the NL Central or the quality of the teams there. I think that the teams in the NL Central are either sliding back or rising slowly. So the Cubs, it'll be interesting to see what they do. They certainly could peddle a guy like Marcus Stroman and get a bundle back that would set them up for 2024 and beyond. I think we still, they've got Ian Happ, they've got, Horner. Seiya Suzuki is starting to show life again, though he has not really been a consistent hitter like he was in Japan. I really like Suzuki. I think he's got a good future. But the Cubs, I don't know. I think that the odds makers may have this wrong. I think because they do generate so many runs, and they're have been involved in a lot of blowouts either way, but more blowouts offensively than giving up runs pitching wise. I think that they're looking at that as a sign at the struggles of other teams in the division, that they're keeping their playoff hopes up. Cincinnati Reds, they are just, they're given a 7.1% chance to make the playoffs, to earn a playoff spot. And I don't understand why that stays so low. I'm not saying it should be 40% or 50%, but the Reds have shown, I mean, the fruits of their farm system are ripening, and they're not just on the vine now. They're being picked, and they're being put to the test, and they are rising to the occasion. I mean, they are a shutout hurled by Clayton Kershaw away of being 8-2 and over their last 10. They certainly in that ballpark are going to score runs. They've got a great offense. Ellie De La Cruz is going to drive a lot of eyes to that team. But you've got Hunter Green. He's showing signs of having a steady third pitch that he can count on. So everybody's not just sitting on the breaking ball and his amazing fastball. So if he gets another off-speed pitch and can throw it consistently, he's going into a different stratosphere then. It'll be interesting to see how Andrew Abbott fears how he holds up over the next week or two. He's going to have some tough opponents he's going to have to pitch against. I think his next big game is against the Astros. So we're going to see a lot from the Reds. We're going to see where they really are. Are they going to be as consistently good against teams like the Astros and the Dodgers and the Pirates and the Brewers and whoever else that they're playing? It'll be interesting to see whether those playoff odds bring it up. And the other thing to keep in mind that I'm surprised that they didn't pick this up with the sports books when they're setting these playoff odds. Overall, they are at a negative 32 run differential. But they have not fared very well in games where they've been in blowouts. When a game is truly out of hand, so we're talking about 5 runs or more that they've lost by, it's they're being outscored 72 to 113. They're scoring 72, giving up 113 runs in those type of games. But lately, they're not in those type of games. They're in tight. They come from behind. The Reds, I really think, are for real. We talked last week about the Reds need to go for it, and I think that they do. They have so much depth in their farm system that if they can bring in a veteran starter to help anchor the young staff with Green and Abbott. Williamson looked good in his last outing this past week. The Reds are going to make a lot of noise, and they're going to make teams very, very nervous. So it'll be interesting to see how they do this weekend series against the Astros, and then they play the Braves. That's going to tell us a lot about, are these young players ready for prime time, more high pressure games? My inkling is that they are, but we'll see here. And they're facing the Astros and Braves at times where, those two teams are suffering from some injury issues. So it'll be really interesting to see how the Reds fare against those two teams, which everybody would by consensus say the Braves are going to be a playoff team. If they don't win the NL East, they're going to be a wild card team. And the Astros, if they don't catch the Rangers in the AL West, then certainly they're going to have a wild card berth. So it'll be interesting to see how the Reds fare up against that. Now the Brewers, and I watched the game this afternoon that they dropped to the Twins. They've lost 6 in a row. Yet going, as we're recording this, they're only a game and a half out. They're another team where they're playing above what their Pythagorean record indicates it should be. And their starting rotation has been just knocked off balance all season due to injuries. Their bullpen has been steady, and we talked a lot about, Devin Williams and the short guys, but these multi-inning guys that they've assembled, in that bullpen, they're really doing a great job. I mean, they really are. Peter Straczynski, Hobie Milner, Elvis Peguero. These are guys that Trevor McGill has been, a godsend for them. These are guys that are not pitching, 7th, 8th, 9th innings per se. their bridge relievers, if their rotation is struggling a little bit, then they're coming in pitching 2 innings to get it to the back of the bullpen if their lineup can get them back in a game that they might fall behind on. And Julian Tehran, he's a 1.48 ERA. I mean, he's only 1-2, but the offense has let him down. They have not scored a lot of runs for him. When he's been on the mound, his WHIP is under 1. I think it's 0.095, I believe is what his WHIP is. Nobody saw that. I certainly didn't see that. He's tried to make a couple of comebacks, and it looks like for whatever reason he's able to put it together now. So the Brewers, I felt that they were the NL Central favorites going back to the preseason, despite all the hype that the Cardinals got and all the trendy people saying, well, the Cubs could make some noise in the division. I thought it was the Brewers' division to lose. The way they've played over the last 7 to 10 days, they're losing the division. They've spent 51 days in first place. They are sliding behind the Pirates. The Pirates have struggled as well lately. I mean, both of these teams, have lost to the Oakland A's. I mean, they were swept by the A's. The Brewers, Pirates lost 2 of 3. I mean, it's a good thing the A's aren't moving to Indianapolis or Nashville, because the way that the Brewers and Pirates are playing, maybe the A's would be a team to contend with if they were moving to a central time zone location. But the Brewers will figure it out. The Brewers aren't going to lose 10, 11, 12 games in a row. I think they're going to be able to right the ship. They play the Pirates for the first time this year at home, and that just blows me away. That June 16th is the first time you're playing a team in your division. That's another reason that this whole everybody plays everybody isn't this wonderful schedule that they came up with. It's just a bad idea. But the Brewers are going to stabilize themselves. I mean, they're the favorites as of right now, according to to the sports books. They're the favorites in a lot of people's eyes, including my own. That's not to dismiss the job that the Pirates are doing or that they have done. The A's series notwithstanding, they've taken care of business against the Reds and against the Cardinals. They're now playing the Cubs for the first time. They're going to see the Cubs in 2 series. They're going to see the Brewers in 2 series over the next 2.5 weeks or so. The Pirates have a daunting schedule coming up. So they're going to be their metal's going to be tested, and they need to figure out who's going to be their 5th starter. They had kid by the name of Beto, an older prospect. He didn't get signed to their Dominican academy until he was 21, but he's done well at the lower levels. He pitches to about a 4 ERA. He went 4 innings in his major league debut on Wednesday, struck out a bunch of players. Literally, the home plate umpire squeezed him. And I hate when that happens. And what's really disappointing is that Winter is a crew chief. So you would expect better behavior from a crew chief. Not necessarily everybody's going to miss calls, but he was obviously squeezing Beto. A couple of the runs that he surrendered, really they should have been out of the inning, and that's why his pitch count went up. But if he can be that answer in the 5th hole, Ben Cherington came out earlier in the week and said Roansy Contreras is going to be in the bullpen, barring injuries or an emergency. He's pitching out of the bullpen now. Contreras pitched himself out of the rotation, and if the Pirates are going to continue to sit atop the division, not necessarily lead the division, but sit atop the division, in the 1st and 2nd place there, they're going to have to answer the pitching issues. And I think Ben Cherington is torn because really I think he would like to be able to move Carlos Santana and Rich Hill at the deadline to bring in more pieces, major league ready pieces, to make the Pirates serious contenders next year. But if they stay in it, it would be really hard to move Hill. Santana, not so much because I think there are enough major league ready bats that are there. Cruz is doing well in his recovery and his rehab from his ankle surgery. So, you're going to have some bats in there. You can move some guys around. Marcano can play all around the infield, as can Castro, so they can slide to first base. But coming up here, they're playing the Cubs as we record this. They're going to play the Cubs again before they leave for London. They're going to play the Brewers this weekend. That is the series to watch in the NL Central this week. They need to take care of business with these division foes in order for them to hang in there. And Ben Cherington's already made one trade. It's not going to be the only trade he makes. I do believe that Cherington has a realistic view of how this season has gone. And don't think that he's not looking at attendance figures. They've been getting better, but the Pirates are still not drawing. And this is an exciting team to watch. So it'll be really interesting to see what Cherington does leading up to the deadline. But again, he's already shown he's not afraid to trade veteran pieces for pieces that could help the Pirates going forward beyond this year. I think Aquila Williams is going to need to stay in the minors probably this year so he can get his bat reignited. But this weekend, a couple of really big series involving NL Central teams. You have the Reds and the Astros, and then you have the Pirates Brewers. It's going to be a big deal. We're going to learn a lot of things that coming in this coming week, especially this weekend, about the teams that are making noise in the NL Central so far. Now, early on in the show, I talked about Andrew McCutchen and his 2000th career hit. And I've admitted, okay, that, I live in Pittsburgh. It doesn't necessarily mean that I am a die-hard Pirate fan, even though I've lived here for close to 25, 30 years. But Andrew McCutchen is the guy that got me to follow the Pirates closely on a regular basis. He's a once-in-a-generational talent pool guy. What he brings to a team is not necessarily going to show up in the box scores. And if you ask his teammates in Philadelphia, he was in 3 years in Philadelphia, you talk to the Brewers, front office and the players in that locker room, Andrew McCutchen made a huge difference. So it was such poetic justice that he hit his 2000th hit at PNC Park. I honestly believe that Andrew McCutchen is as instrumental in the Pirates really turning around their fortunes compared to last year to this year. I was a lot more optimistic about the Pirates going into this season. But, locally, sportscasters, they don't care. If it's not the Steelers or the Penguins, they just don't pay attention anymore. And it's a shame because Pittsburgh really used to be a baseball city. But as it's gentrified, the old-time baseball fans have sort of been turned off by what has transpired since the 13, 14, 15 playoff teams. And I don't know that they're going to come back that easily. But Cherington's is going to keep looking at these attendance figures, and if they stay flat, it makes it easier for him to move a Rich Hill. But if they advance and McCutchen keeps setting personal milestones, I think then that he may push more of his chips into the middle of the table than he maybe had planned to do. But back to McCutchen. Some players just mean more to a fan base than people outside of that fan base can possibly understand. And one of the local sports radio guys posed a theory after Kutch had his 2000th hit that McCutchen, as far as recent memory, recent time, McCutchen is the most popular Pirate since Roberto Clemente. So now that's talking Willie Stargell, who has a statue outside of PNC Park. As you come across the Warhol Bridge, the Clemente Bridge, you see a statue of Willie Stargell welcoming you coming across and coming up to PNC Park. Most people were outraged when Joe Starkey said that, but I believe it. I mean, I really believe that Andrew McCutchen is more popular and has meant more to Pirate success than Pop Stargell and We Are Family in '79 and all of that. And Willie Stargell did a marvelous job picking up the mantle when Clemente perished in that plane crash after the '72 season. But Andrew McCutchen has basically now put himself in the discussion for Hall of Fame consideration on retirement. Generally, a 5-career WAR is sort of like the baseline for a player to be considered. He's at 4.8 right now. During his peak, he had WARs series of 5.8, 2 at 7.5, and then another at 5.8. During his peak, his 4 or 5 year peak, he's put up better WAR numbers than guys like Don Mattingly and Dale Murphy, who I think both already should be in the Hall of Fame. But I mean, this is giving you a comparison as to the type of player that McCutchen is, because certainly he's not the defensive player he was, he's not the base runner he was, but he's a very good base runner. And he does all the little things to get himself on base or to help put his team in a position to win. He had probably one of the best at bats I have ever witnessed in the series against the Cardinals. Made the pitcher work, didn't chase, drew a walk. He later came in and scored, but it was one of the most impressive at bats that I've ever seen. So it'll be interesting to see and watch McCutchen's impact on this team. Even if his playing time starts to be reduced as the season goes on, I don't believe that it needs to be. But if the Pirates are committed to bringing in more younger players, giving them a chance, should they slide back a bit and not really be in the discussion of a division title, whatever the Pirates achieve this year, it's because of Andrew McCutchen. And Andrew McCutchen got me to follow the Pirates back when it mattered that that there was an American League and a National League, because you had the DH, no DH. You really had two different styles of play. I had an American League team, I cover and have been a fan of the Toronto Blue Jays, for a big portion of my adult life. National League wise, it depended where I was living. I tended to always live in National League cities. So, when I was based in the Southeast, I watched a lot of Braves baseball. As a kid growing up, I watched a lot of Phillies and Mets baseball. I followed the Phillies probably more than the Mets. I worked for the Marlins for 2 seasons. So really, I always fought the temptation to be a Pirate fan, and it wasn't because of the losing seasons or whatever it is. I just felt, that if there's just something where I just didn't buy in, Andrew McCutchen made me a Pirate fan as far as National League teams go. McCutchen always also reminds me of the kind of player that our dads or our grandfathers would want to root for. So, in honor of Father's Day, I want to go through really, really quick a list of players that I think in the NL Central from each team that would be considered dad favorites. And we talked about McCutchen in Pittsburgh. Rich Hill should be in that conversation, but he's not really a Pirate. He's only been there for 1 year, so I don't want to put him in there. In Cincinnati, you could look at Joey Votto. I think that is fair, though. Again, at this point, I don't know whether his career is over or not. And Votto also, I think, for some older men my generation, I think his approach might be too goofy or too off the beaten path. But Luke Maile, their catcher, he reminds me of a guy. He plugged along. He's the ultimate teammate. Pitchers love to throw to him. He's the kind of guy that our dads or grandfathers would want to root for. Doesn't have to be a star. They want to root for him. Whenever he does well, dad and granddad, they're happy. In Chicago, I wanted to go Kyle Hendricks because I believe he's the only holdover from the World Series team. I mean, David Ross played for that team, but he's a manager now, so you really can't put him in there. But the Cubs have a lot of players that play hard, maximize their abilities, and I think nobody does it better than Ian Happ. He plays all over the place. He plays hard. He's the kind of guy that you want to root for. So I would imagine that Ian Happ would be, a dad favorite player. I mean, again, when you're a young kid, you want to flash. So, we're going to go to, with Cincinnati, Ellie De La Cruz, Matt McClain, TJ Friedel. Those are the kind of guys that kids are going to get excited about. Hunter Green. And the Cubs, I mean, say Suzuki, watching Cub games, I see a lot of Suzuki jerseys, that kids are wearing. There's a lot more flashier players, Marcus Stroman, but that's not the kind of guy that dads are going to root for and dads are going to follow. On the Brewers, I'm going to say Brian Anderson because he's not a guy. He's a talented guy, but he grinds it out. He does a little bit of everything really, really well. Brian Anderson, to me, would be a favorite of Brewers' dads and grandfathers. I think it's just the way that he plays. I mean, they've got some just really exciting, wonderful young players in that organization. Owen Miller is a nice, story. He's kind of salvaged his career. Christian Yelich, I think, would be frustrating for dads and grandfathers. But I think Brian Anderson is that guy that you look at on the Brewers and you say, you know what? I can root for him. Rowdy Tellez, too, because Rowdy Tellez looks like the guy that your dad and grandfather's playing Sunday beer league softball with. And talk about a guy that really has turned his career around and found a way to be consistent and be a constant producer. I'd imagine Rowdy Tellez is another guy there for Milwaukee. St. Louis is easy. And you would think I'm going to say Adam Wainwright. But again, he's very honest. He's very direct. So some dads and granddads don't want to deal with that. But Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt, as talented as they are, Gold Glove fielders, clutch hitters, shows power, great teammates, great work ethic. Those two guys, I would imagine that dads in St. Louis or Cardinal fans would have a lot of big debates. Who's more important? Who do you love more? Is it Nolan Arenado or Paul Goldschmidt? So just a nice little way to kind of end this Central Intelligence podcast for this week, thinking about players that dads and grandfathers might follow as opposed to younger fans who are going to go with the big stars, the emerging stars like Ellie De La Cruz and O'Neill Cruz and players like that. We'll be back again next week. I think we're going to talk about the St. Louis Cardinals in depth. I'll try not to bring the fork out because I don't want to totally alienate the Cardinal fan base. But I think we're going to talk about the Cardinals next week because, I mean, they are a fascinating case study, and they may hold the key to what happens and who ends up winning the NL Central, even by them continuing to sputter and fail. And I think they're a case study in what does a team do when they've got big stars on their roster, but just really don't have the chemistry or the leadership in the dugout, which I think is a major problem for the Cardinals. We'll talk about them next week. Again, make sure you like and subscribe, not only the OK Baseball YouTube channel, but also go to Spotify and anywhere you would find your podcast. Make sure you subscribe and download this show, all of the programs that are available on Slasher Sports Cinema. Suki's Suburbia does a wonderful podcast as well for Slasher Sports, more of a culture thing, the Honeydew Project. Just subscribe to all of the channels, to all of the podcast feeds. That way you will not miss out on any great program, which would mean you'll have to put up with me because you'll get notifications for this show as well. But if you really want to know the true impact and the true stories and breaking news items on the NL Central Intelligence is your place to tune in and download on a weekly basis. I'm Steve Beck. It was great talking with you. Let's hope your team does something. Gets me to talk about them next week. Thanks for watching. For more great content and to stay up to date with Central Intelligence and the OK Baseball podcast, click subscribe now. Put away the files, lock up the safe. We will see you here next time.